As the world warms, we'll need to adjust to more extreme weather patterns. Part of that will involve the conservation of hundreds and thousands of plant species. At the Royal Botanic Gardens in Kew, London, scientists are working with global partners to stop biodiversity loss and develop nature-based solutions before it's too late.
Extinction is a natural process. Species evolve and go extinct, but we think the rate at which that's happening is much faster than it was in the past. So it's a concern for us. It might be that the species provides a particular service in the ecosystem, so if we lose that, we might have a knock-on effect for other species that may depend on it.
Set over 320 acres of ornamental gardens, woodlands and a nature reserve, Kew has the largest and most diverse botanical and mycological collections in the world, with over 50,000 living plants and over 8.5 million preserved plants and specimens. I'm heading into the Temperate House with Dr. Steve Bachman, just one of 300 scientists working to understand and protect plants and fungi from their greatest enemy, humans. So Steve, is climate change the biggest threat to plant species?
Well, it's certainly a big issue, a big global issue, and in some people's minds, the public is certainly aware of climate change as a threat. But from the species that we've actually assessed for the IUCN Red List, which tells us which species are close to extinction, the actual dominant threat is still land cover change, so the conversion of natural habitat into agriculture and pasture land. So that's reducing the range of species, and as they get smaller, their risk of extinction increases.
The true impact of climate change is hard to estimate, even with modelling, because so many plants are yet to be studied in detail. More resources are needed to gather the data to assess the risk, although for well-known species, scientists estimate 80% of the range could be lost. We're so focused on saving animals like pandas and tigers, but are plants just as much under threat?
Yes, when we first did an estimate of how at risk plant species were as an entire group, we found out that surprisingly they were almost as threatened as mammals, which have been comprehensively assessed. The problem is we haven't actually fully assessed every species of plant yet, because there's at least 350,000 different species that we need to get through compared to 5,500 mammals, for example. So it's a different scale that we have to deal with. So at Kew, what we do in our team here, we're working on techniques to speed up that process. And for the species that we don't know what the extinction risk is, we can actually do some modelling and some predictions. So that's the work that we're working on at the moment, to try and put an assessment on each individual plant species in the world. Although there are regulations.
Historically, Kew's interest in plants was more economic, but the global partnerships are now being used to study and conserve.
Yeah, so this is the example of one of the species I was mentioning. This is an aloe, Aloe baileyii.
Where is it?
So it's just hiding there.
Oh, yes. Oh, well, this is the plant blindness you were talking about.
Exactly.
I'd look at that and go, okay, it's a plant.
Yes, you wouldn't know that this one is in fact an endangered species. So this one occurs in Kenya, Tanzania, and it's in fact threatened by multiple things. So it's, as we mentioned, this land cover change, the growth of the agriculture, but it's also a succulent, so it's at risk because people collect it illegally in the wild. And the thing we haven't calculated yet is how at risk this might be from climate change. So without even taking that into account, it's already endangered, so it could be even more threatened in the future with the changing climate.
A lot of the data crunching is being done by ecologist Dr. Sam Pirinen. He wants to give me a better perspective of the huge challenge that lies ahead. Wow, this view makes me realise just how much work I have to do in my garden. It's incredible.
There's such a high diversity of plants from here, a good portion of the total diversity of plants present in the world. And there are actually a few tiny plants that are in the middle of this green sea that actually may solve some of the biggest challenges we're facing for the future.
I guess for me, it makes me realise how little I know about so many different plants. I could maybe name two in here. We always focus on the big and the beautiful, but the smaller plants are key too, aren't they?
They are. One of the first challenges is actually just to describe those plants. We don't know their names, we don't know they exist, so that's one of the first challenges.
Most of Sam's time isn't spent amongst the plants. He connects online with scientists overseas to analyse and identify underutilised plants that may be more resilient and nutritionally beneficial in our ever-changing environment.
So this map here is really interesting. So that represents huge amount of data, terabytes and terabytes of data. This is showing actually where all naturalists of the world, everywhere across the planet, are going in the field and identifying where species occur, where they found, what is their geographic distribution.
So the red bits are where there's more
Where there's more
action.
of them. Yeah.
Yeah. There's probably action in New Zealand, but you've chopped us off. Thank you very much.
I did.
We
will
do
never
exist,
come
you know,
back to
New
Kew.
Zealanders. Yeah. I'm sure it was the computer resizing it, Sam. You're forgiven. Back to Sam's studies, which are varied. In 2019, he co-authored a paper looking at the climatic tolerance range of 29 different crops in sub-Saharan Africa.
We looked at where all these different wild relatives of all these crops were located in the world and checked whether they were occurring in what would be the future climate of the crops in sub-Saharan Africa. And we identified hundreds of species of wild relatives that could actually provide that adaptive potential to crops.
Okay, so then with that information, what you're giving it to the people in the countries that will need that information, so that, you know, if their crops die, that, hey, maybe you could use this particular variety.
Exactly, so there are two levels here. So there's using another variety that would be already adapted to those conditions, but there's also those crop wild relatives that we wouldn't use directly because they're not really up and ready for cultivation, but we could somehow use their characteristics, their properties, to do some crop improvement and improve through their genes and their traits, improve the current crops that we're using, so provide the resilience to climate.
In the first 4 months of 2022 alone, Sam collaborated with botanists, phytochemists, ecologists, evolutionary biologists and climatologists to publish 7 studies.
If you want to preserve biodiversity, but you don't provide food to people, then people will somehow harm, because they will need to forage, they will need to go for these plants, and they will harm nature. So we need to provide food to people to preserve biodiversity. And we need to preserve biodiversity to address climate change, etc. So we need to have a very integrative approach here.
The work has already unearthed incredible species that were only well known in the local communities, such as the inset plant, which could be a superfood in the future. So it's called a false banana. Why?
Well, it is a plant that is from the banana family, and it has fruits that look like bananas, but they're actually inedible. They're full of big and hard seeds, so we can't really eat them. But still, this plant is very important and feeds millions of people, 20 million people in Africa.
So you can't eat the actual fruit off it, so what parts of it are actually edible?
So actually, it's a hidden part. It's the underground part of the plant. This is the corm. And it provides starch to a lot of people, so a lot of carbohydrates and energy. And people are using it. So the plant is found across Eastern Africa up to Central Africa in the wild, but it's cultivated in just one place, which is Ethiopia. This is the only place where they know how to cultivate it and how to process it to eat it.
So why is this plant important?
First, because it provides a lot of food. It's a massive plant, as we can see. It provides a lot of starch again too. It can feed just a few plants, few of those can feed a family of 5 people for months. It also provides food when there's no other food available. So when it's not the season for cereals, for example, this plant is still able to provide food. And it's also a drought-tolerant species. So it responds very well to dry conditions, warmer conditions. So especially if we're thinking about the climate crisis and future climate change, this could be a species that could help us feed people and feed the world under future scenarios of climate change.
In yet another study, Sam co-authored a paper which newly identified over 1,000 underutilised plants that could address vitamin B deficiencies. Currently, the most popular source of B vitamins includes dairy, eggs, beef, poultry and seafood, which are not easily accessed by millions around the world. But plants can be more sustainable and more easily cultivated.
This is a legume. This is a very important family of plants.
The legume family includes the widely cultivated peas and beans that are a global food staple. So you know that, peas and beans, those legumes are great and they're edible, but hang on, let's look at all these other family members, such as this one, to see, what can be done with that.
That's exactly what we're focusing on, but we don't know the properties of all these 19,000 other species of the legume family. So that's what we're trying to investigate. We're using some techniques to try to predict somehow what could be the nutritional content of those, and then we identify those species and we bring them to the lab to try to do some chemical analysis and see if we can confirm those predictions and if those are actually extra nutritious and could feed a lot of people. But this is one of those thousands of species that we're trying to predict the nutritional content of, and especially focusing on B vitamins that are very important for health.
Transplanting a plant or any species to a different part of the world has consequences, which must be thoroughly investigated. But first, the plants must be analysed. So the potential is there, shall we say?
Yes, the potential is there. And now we need to confirm that potential. So if we want to move to a plant-based diet, the legume family will have a very high importance for humanity.
But while Sam focused on vitamin B in this instance, he's also analysing the data for biodiversity, climate change resilience, conservation, nutrition, and in the case of this yam, medicinal properties. I know it's an important thing here, but this looks like a weed, but it's a yam. So you better, tell me why it's important.
Well, the border between weed and something useful is very thin, actually.
Yeah.
So this particular plant, for example, is providing the compound that is called diosgenin. And diosgenin is a steroid that also is used for contraceptive pills. So all these tiny plants with tiny flowers here that are under all this canopy of plants can also be useful.
But it also says here, I'm looking at the information things, obviously I don't know what I'm talking about, it says not evaluated.
Yes.
What does that mean? Because you've just told me all this information and people are using it as medicine.
The problem is that for some of these plants, we actually don't know how threatened they are. If we don't evaluate their threat levels, then we can't protect them. So that's what we're doing at Kew. We're trying to evaluate how threatened those species are in their wild environment, and then we're trying to preserve them.
So you've only got a few 100,000 to go and you'll be done. As we've seen with global warming, humans cannot always be relied upon to think about the environment. But there is a possible solution a few miles from Kew Gardens. The Millennium Seed Bank Partnership is one of the biggest conservation projects in the world. The underground collection of over 2.4 billion seeds from around the world is housed in sub-zero chambers in flood, bomb and radiation-proof vaults, banking them for the future. It's the worst-case scenario backup plan if a species is lost to extinction. And that future is symbolised in one empty pot in the Temperate House, a reminder of the now extinct St Helena olive tree.
All we have is a photo left of what it once was, and you can see the image there of the DNA collection. So all we have left of this species is the DNA.
So you've got the DNA of the olive, you can't bring it back?
Not with the current technology we have.
Some might say it's just one plant. I mean, why do people need to care?
So it's like a complicated machine. If we take a little part away from it, maybe it will carry on for a little while, but if we keep taking the bits out, that machine might stop working. So until we fully understand how everything works together, it's best to keep things as they are, conserve what we've got, and try to avoid this situation where species are lost forever.